And so what Kuhn showed was there's a number of phases we go through. First, the existing paradigm encounters an anomaly. An anomaly is an inexplicable observation, something you can't deny but can't explain. And the planets were the anomaly there. In fact, the word planet means to wander in Greek. Planeta is wander. The wandering stars were the planets. Then what happens? Initially, the anomaly is ignored, or sometimes rejected. It isn't really happening. Then, as it builds up, people try to explain it within the existing paradigm. That's the epicycles. Then a new paradigm is proposed in which the anomaly is resolved, but that's usually rejected, often ridiculed. And then finally, it gets accepted as it begins to explain things better. This isn't a new idea. Of course, Schopenhauer put it much better earlier. Every truth passes through 3 stages before it's recognized. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it's opposed. Third, it's regarded as self-evident. Max Planck, talking about the same thing, said, a new scientific idea, truth, does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die. Now, I think we are going through exactly the same thing with regard to consciousness and what is consciousness. Except what we are dealing with here is not just a paradigm, it's actually something much more fundamental. It's what I call a meta-paradigm. Meta meaning beyond. The meta-paradigm is the paradigm behind the paradigms. So behind all the different paradigms, whether it's quantum theory, relativity, DNA theory, any paradigm in science, behind that paradigm is a deeper underlying paradigm which runs throughout the whole of the scientific worldview. In fact, it basically runs throughout the whole of our social worldview. And that meta-paradigm, the current meta-paradigm, says the real world is the material world. This is the real stuff. Space, time, and matter are primary. And it, again, just as it seemed obvious that the Earth was still, it seems obvious that this stuff is real. And we don't question it most of the time. This seems the real world. But there's an anomaly in this worldview. And it's a real anomaly. I mean, things like remote viewing, reincarnation, healing, these are all problems for this worldview. But they're not yet real anomalies for the worldview because they're still not accepted as problems by the majority of scientists. Some people see them as problems, other people just say, oh, we'll understand them later, it's false reporting or coincidence, whatever. So they're not yet the status of a true anomaly in the Kuhnian sense because they haven't yet got to the stage where everybody accepts it's real. There is, however, one anomaly for this worldview, this meta-paradigm, and that is consciousness itself. And it's a real anomaly because it cannot be doubted. We can't doubt the fact we're conscious. And it cannot be explained. And so what do? We do exactly what Thomas Kuhn predicted. We ignore it. When we can't ignore it any longer, we try to explain it in terms of the existing model. It's what I sometimes call epicycling. It's a new word. Epicycling is trying to fit things into the existing model. And so we think, well, maybe it's something to do with the complexity of the information processing that produces consciousness. Or maybe it's something to do with quantum effects traveling down these microtubules in the nerve cells that produces consciousness. There's lots of different theories about what produces consciousness in the brain. This is we're in the epicycling stage, trying to fit consciousness into the old worldview, the old paradigm. No one ever questions the fundamental assumption. The fundamental assumption that is not questioned in the current meta-paradigm is that matter is insentient. We assume that matter is totally unconscious, and that's where the problem arises. How does consciousness come out of something that is totally absolutely unconscious. So the alternative meta-paradigm that I've been exploring is much more, another way of putting it is, consciousness is a fundamental quality of the cosmos, as fundamental as space, time, and matter. Actually, that's not true, as we'll see in a moment, but talking to more conservative audiences, I like to start them off with the fact that consciousness is as fundamental as space, time, and matter. Where we're going is to see that it's more fundamental. But this is a halfway stage to take the mind along safely for the moment before we get down to the real stuff. Okay, there's a couple of ways in which consciousness is more fundamental, is primary. The first is something I've touched upon already, that consciousness is in everything. We see it in not just human beings. We assume that dogs are experiencing beings. She has this wonderful tuft on her head, and I just couldn't resist this day putting a bow on a tuft. By the same token, we think fish probably experience. They experience their watery world. They probably experience pain. You know, we sort of, if we catch a fish, we wouldn't feel too good about skinning it alive. You know, we feel it feels pain. There's some consciousness there. Going further down, what about jellyfish? You know, now science would say no, they can't be conscious. They don't have a nervous system. But that's just an assumption. Maybe what the nervous system does is bring the consciousness more into focus. But again, one of my intuitive tests for people is, which do you find it easy to do? To yank the plug out of your computer or pick up a jellyfish and throw it on the fire? There's something, you know, we feel there's something there. We don't feel good about throwing a jellyfish on the fire, even though it's got no brain. I believe consciousness goes all the way down to simple cells, and even down to the fundamental units of matter, which we'll look at more in a minute what they are. Now, this isn't consciousness as we think of it. David yesterday talked about Bohm's idea of proto-minds. Other people talk about it as proto-consciousness. It's something, it's the faintest glimmer of something. But it doesn't mean to say that, you know, bacteria think or have feelings or whatever. Maybe a bacterium has this vaguest sense of whether it's warm or with a vaguest sense of some chemical acidity or something. It would just be a very faint glimmer. In fact, I've got here a picture of a bacterium's consciousness. That's what it looks like compared to ours. But if you look carefully, it's not completely black. You see there's a border around the bottom of the screen. There's something there. It's not completely nothing. There's something very, very faint. So consciousness is there all the way through. So that I believe what's happened as life has evolved, it isn't that life reached a certain stage, a nervous system or whatever it was, and then something magic happened. At that stage, something, it really is magic in modern science, something magic happened, and out of inert matter, suddenly mind appeared out of nowhere. I think consciousness, in essence, subjectivity, like the interior world, is always there. And what has happened as the complexity of the physical world has evolved, so the images, the forms that appear in consciousness have also grown richer and more complex, until today, you know, we have this very rich experience of the world. We have thoughts, we have feelings, and with human beings also we are aware that we are conscious, we are self-aware, we have this sense of I-ness. As Fred said, it's not really true, and I'll touch on that more later, but we have all this going on in our minds. So it's the contents of consciousness which have evolved, not consciousness itself. Consciousness has always been there. So this is the first way consciousness is primary. Consciousness is in everything. And the second bit is the opposite is also true. Everything is in consciousness.